Grace and peace be with all of you. This episode of the Christmas story is often avoided, sometimes forgotten. It's typically not included in our lighthearted and joyful pageant stories, but it is part of the Christmas story. The world that Jesus was born into was a brutal place. People in power could behave as they wished. People without power suffered often at their hands. This part of the story relates to the Magi. The Magi visit Herod, King Herod the Great, and they assume that Herod will know about this king that they have been made aware of, that they are trying to find, following the star. And they assume that Herod knows exactly where this king is, and so they go to his palace to ask him. But this is all news to Herod. He has not noticed the star in the sky, or if he has not understood its significance. And so he tries to trick the Magi, and he says to them, "Come back and tell me when you find the child so that I can go and worship him too." When in fact, Herod's plan is to destroy this new king and get rid of any competition to his power. But the Magi somehow know, they receive a message that they should not return to Herod, and they go home by another way. Herod is enraged that the Magi have tricked him and not come back and reported on the whereabouts of the child. So Herod decides the best way to get rid of this competitor child king is to order the slaughter of every child 2 years and under born in or around Bethlehem anytime around the reported birthday that the Magi had shared with him. So Joseph receives a message in time and flees to Egypt with Mary and baby Jesus. And they live there for several years until God sends another message that Herod is dead and that they are to return to Israel. Now, upon Herod's death, the kingdom is divided up between Herod's three sons: Archelaus, who is the oldest, Herod Antipas, who is the Herod of our Easter story, and Philip. Archelaus, as the oldest, gets the choice bits of the kingdom, Judea and Samaria. Herod Antipas gets Galilee, and Philip gets the frontier country near Syria. Now, it says in the text that Joseph was afraid of Archelaus. Joseph was wise to be afraid. He didn't even need an angel to tell him to be afraid. Archelaus was more brutal and violent than even his own father, Herod the Great. In fact, after 10 years of rule under Archelaus, the people of Judea and Samaria sent representatives all the way to Rome, to Caesar Augustus, to plead with Augustus to take Archelaus away, to depose him and put someone else in his place because he had mistreated the people so badly. And Augustus does investigate Archelaus' rule and deposes Archelaus and puts someone else in his place. Now, when we hear the Christmas story, as we tell it, we're looking back. We're reading our current understanding of the story back into the touch points, the pivot points, when it probably wasn't at all clear to the people living through the story at the time what would happen next, or even what the significance was of what was going on. But because we stand now in the present and look back at that story, it all looks very clear to us. But if you think about Joseph, Joseph sat in Egypt for several years with no word from God. The angel sent him there. He and Mary and the baby lived there for years until another angel came and told him to return to Israel. And that's the way most of us live our lives, in that in-between time when things are not so clear, when we're not really sure how to read the signs around us, when it doesn't feel like we're getting directions or messages from on high about where we should go and what we should do next. That's mostly where we live, and I suspect Mary and Joseph spent most of their lives living in that place also. But it's interesting when we think about human experience, and we talk about it a fair amount in church, and people of faith are clear that God does in fact speak to us, and Scripture tells us about angels and messengers and prophets, ways that God clearly communicates his message to us. But there are other areas of human experience too, where people feel very much that they are being taught something or given new information, or they discover something, and that message or discovery or information has come from outside of them and been given to them. So let me try and make that a little clearer. For example, artists will often talk this way. You may know some of the famous quotes from Michelangelo about how every stone had a sculpture already within it, and it was his job as the sculptor to patiently chip away and set that hidden entity free, to discover what was inside. Or, for example, oftentimes writers, authors will talk about the experience of writing a novel this way. They talk about characters coming to life and how they want the characters to do this thing and they want the story to go this direction, but the characters are very stubborn and they disagree and they refuse to do what the author wants them to do. And so the author is forced to listen to what the characters decide to do, and the author follows the characters. Even scientists and mathematicians will sometimes seem to receive some sort of understanding in a dream or a dreamlike experience. Descartes had a series of 3 dreams that led him to discover or invent, I'm not sure what the right word is, our modern analytical geometry. Einstein likewise had a dream that led him to his understanding of relativity, our periodic table, the structure of benzene, the shape of DNA, all of these things, the scientists whose names we attach to these discoveries and understandings, they had dreams, they had dreamlike experiences where these things sort of came as if from outside them and became clear, and they gained understanding of them. Now, I'm not implying that all of these artists and scientists and authors and even musicians, you may know the song Yesterday by the Beatles, that song came fully formed to Paul McCartney in a dream. And he was so astonished when he woke up and wrote it down that he went around asking everyone he knew. He didn't believe that a song could just fall into him while he was dreaming. He thought, oh, I must have heard this somewhere, and I'm just remembering it. But in fact, it came to him in a dream. So whether or not we're a person of faith, we as human beings can have these kinds of experiences of an external voice, an external message teaching us something that we didn't know before. And I think there is something to be understood, something to be noticed, something important about the fact that the people who tend to have these experiences and then tell us about them, the discoverers, the inventors, the creators, and the people of faith, all these people have something in common. And what is that? All of these people spend regular time practicing the art of listening deeply to the world around them, paying deep attention to the world. This is true of artists, scientists, creators of all kinds, and people of faith. In fact, this is what we do when we come together as a community of faith. Week in and week out, day in and day out, we are tuning our hearts and minds and spirits to become good listeners, to learn to listen well, to listen attentively in a world that is always distracted. It was distracted before Jesus was born. It was distracted during Jesus' day. It is distracted now. Distracted by everyday life, by anxiety, by loud voices, by pressures of all kinds. It takes intention to listen well. And as a community of faith, that is what we are practicing here. We are practicing listening to God. We are practicing listening to one another. We are practicing listening to the world, especially to those voices that no one else hears or wants to listen to. We are training our whole selves, body, mind, and spirit, to listen. As I think about leaving 2020 behind, 2020, in my experience, was a loud, cacophonous year. It felt like everyone was not just talking, but yelling, being loud, insisting that their voice raise above the din on social media, in the streets, on television, between neighbors, between friends and family members. Everyone was talking at everyone else. Very, very few people, in my awareness, were listening. As we enter into 2021 together, my prayer is that we enter in with the intention of stilling our worries, practicing stilling our bodies and our minds, and listening deeply for God's voice in our lives and for the needs and pains and joys of those around us, because deeply listening is always a profound act of love. Year of 2021, let us listen.